Hi, everybody. Welcome to Tactical Wisdom. Sorry we're late. I'm a giant boomer and was just now learning that I have to push the button twice. So here we are. Welcome. Um, we are joined today by the safety doc himself. Doc, tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, glad to. Thank you so much, Joe. And so I am the safety doc, right? Well, I'm Dr. David Perrodin. I've been a school administrator, an educator, worked with schools for going on almost 30 years. Boy, oh boy. Um, I have done school safety consulting, worked as an expert legal witness in school cases involving school violence which resulted in student death. So I am also the author of the book School of Errors, Rethinking School Safety in America, which released in 2019. In 2013, and again in 2019, I delivered two PBS presentations about school safety. Both of those continue to be syndicated across the country. So I've done a lot with school safety. I also study chaos and chaos events and how humans respond to chaos, which actually is my most recent book, The Velocity of Information: Human Thinking During Chaotic Times,
You
released
mean
in
this one?
2022. So it is. It is. There it is. That book, which is in the Library of Congress.
I'm going to
Um,
flex on
and
everybody. I've got like a whole paragraph handwritten by the doc. Uh, so good stuff.
Don't let the flexing stop there. Show them the letter.
right.
Show them the letter.
Oh, well, and
So
in addition to that, I have this lovely, including a caricature letter from Doc. I mean, this is art of a better quality that I'm sending you with the
that is
books, right?
that'll be worth
But this is
worth
good stuff,
money
man.
down the road. So keep that collection together. So when you get on
Oh, I
Antique
am. I
Roadshow
am.
in another 20, 30 years, or whoever gets that,
It
they'll
goes in
be,
a special drawer, and when I open it, I go, oh. So,
especially with inflation, be worth tens of thousands of dollars. And
Doc,
I've always been known, guys, as the outsider in school safety. So I do have a PhD, right? And I've worked in schools. I teach school legal classes at a 700 level at a university. But I've kind of punched back, right? I've said, hey, like a lot of stuff that schools do for school safety is school theater. It's not based on anything. It's customer perceived value. It's social proof. And also, states propose 400 bills a year on school safety, about 80 get passed, but it's a lot of knee jerk reaction. The feds don't do a lot in school safety other than passing gun free zone and stuff like that. So I when I wrote School of Errors, it really was the stand up against this crazy industrial complex of all these fortifications and bizarre programs for safety. And it stood the test of time. And people who have contacted me from all over the country and all over the world, say they use the book almost as an easement to tough discussions, as a shield when people come at them and say, "Oh, we have to, fortify our schools with bollards and bulletproof, windows and stuff like this." So, that has kind of been my moniker. As kind of the against the common sense against the common wave of rhetoric, I guess.
and that's kind of important because there's so many things that people do that sound good on paper that don't actually um, have much relevance to real life. For example, gun-free zones. We'll get into that in a little bit. But the reason for me wanting to bring you on here, and the reason why I want to do this show is I do a lot of active shooter training, and we have to kind of marry this idea together of protecting our schools and responding to active shooters. And there are some concrete steps that schools can take, and there are some concrete steps that you as a person can take. So we just wanted to kind of get that together, have a chat, talk about what's going on. We're going to talk about the incident, and we're going to talk about steps you can take and things that can be done to try and reduce the risk of it going on. We're not here to beat up on any one side or anything, but there were mistakes made, and we need to call them out for what they are and talk about ways in which you could get involved locally in your own spot. And Mr. Scott, I'm glad you caught it. I said on paper, and in my head, I did it all. I said on paper, unbreaded, but well done. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So what though motivated you to write Velocity of Information after School of Errors, though? I wanted to get that question out of the way.
Yeah, so Velocity of Information, the blue covered, book with the brain and the light. The cover really represents kind of all the information that comes at us, right? All at light speed. And so after School of Errors was a school safety book, completely school safety. Um, and then Velocity of Information is a pivot, but also kind of still couples to that. And Velocity of Information was, how do people function during long-term chaos events lasting more than 90 days, during the pandemic and civil unrest and so forth. So I was digging into that and interviewed 10 people. It's a phenomenal book. It's up for the S.I. Hayakawa Semantics Award, which is an international award for the meaning of words, right? Talking about what does it mean to have finite voltage or burning out after 90 days. And we see that now with people. A wet bulb effect of just being surrounded by so much negative information that you feel you can't get away from it, and it starts to increase your anxiety and actually can lead to suicide and things like that. So in writing it, I wanted to describe this long-term chaos and how people respond to that, and then also how to mitigate that, right? So if you're just you, or if you're a father, as I wrote, my daughter was 9 years old during the pandemic, the start of the pandemic, and one of the chapters early on, she was saying, "Oh my goodness, like my school is closed down. The playground is, they're digging out the playground equipment so you can't go there, and all these things." And she was really worked up about it. And I thought, what can I do? So I said, we're going out. We're going to make a trip. And I grabbed my tripod and a camera, and I said, okay, we're going to be reporters. And we went to the playground. We went to the hospital parking lot. What do you see? It seems pretty it's pretty normal, right? We went to the Walmart in our town. What do you see? Okay, people are outside. They're still going in, right? There's a line. It's just as different. We went to the armory. I wanted to see what was happening at the armory. I'm like, we have a runway next to our armory. If they're starting to drop off a lot of stuff and it's pretty packed, then Dad's got a concern here. So, but I helped her to say I observed. That was one thing, and then Joe, you helped me tremendously with the Velocity of Information in many areas. One is indicators. What to look for that really tells you what's going on. Example that we wrote about it in the book was somebody named Bob, who comes into an office and kind of shaking the raindrops off of his jacket, and you're like, oh, that's an indicator, like it must be raining outside. I've been working, I don't have any windows, but Bob comes in all wet. These are indicators. What are indicators? They're putting barricades up around utility areas. Oh, that's an indicator. So getting people to be aware of indicators, and then also another big part of the book is called a member check network. If you can get 5 people together, and preferably not all in your area, right? If you get 5 people together on your block, that doesn't really help inform you what's going on. But 5 people around the country, and you're checking in and saying, what's happening in your stores? How are people reacting? What are you seeing from your government or news? Are they, restricting travel in any way? And you start to get that information and bring it in. You have a better mosaic of what's happening. You can start to prepare yourself, and it helps to prevent against these kind of one-off things where something happens in one area and you believe it's happening all over the place. So that's a tremendous asset of the book, of helping to understand this, again, member check network that anybody can put together, and then how to I see a lot of people doing this right now on YouTube, actually. So I see prepper channels, and what they do is they just read off like 100 things that people email them. In Little Rock, Arkansas, gas is $5.83 a gallon. Last week it was $5.45. And it's like, that's information, right? But that's not a member check network. And so I talk about what you do, Joe, and really helping inform, and even using technology like Solocator app to identify time and location of places, and then metadata. So what day did this happen? So you can establish what's called provenance, like what happened first, what happened second, what happened third. So that's a good practice. And also it's a good practice when we get into talking about school safety and school violence incidents, provenance, what happened first, what happened second, what happened third. Those are really important things to analyzing an event. Um, so yeah, I thought this was an unstudied area, which I found
Yeah.
it was. I also found that most people today are releasing books, something to the extent of like, a great reset or something like that. And the book doesn't go in that direction. It's not going down a political or kind of that. It's just saying, here's what chaos looks like. Here's how it manifests. Here's some times in history: World War II, World War One, 9/11, the Great Depression, and kind of breaking these things down. Again, plus awesome interviews. Larry Lawton, America's Biggest Jewel Thief. One question I asked Larry is, how'd you find out about 9/11? He said, I never was asked that, right? Someone who spent, more than half of the time that he was in prison in solitary confinement. So, how do you get information and how do you make sense of it? Because right now, if any of us just turn on the news, we turn on David Muir ABC at 6:00 tonight, it'd be breaking news and it'll be like 10 horrific, things, which, 9 might not be horrific, but I mean, it's whatever he and the media want to try to convince you and to keep you
Yeah.
up at this level where you never have a break. You can't think for yourself.
Well, and I think that when we bring this back around to the Uvalde incident, that's why we're seeing such a vilification of the gun, because they want to shift the narrative away from the behaviors that occurred in the months leading up to the incident, the day of the incident, and immediately after the incident. There were a lot of mistakes made that contributed. We're not saying blamed, but we're saying contributed to the issues that were had. And I'm not going to mention accounts or names or anything like that. But the point is that on a particular day, something very bad happened because we sort of allowed it to happen, and a lot of things that were supposed to happen didn't happen. And so we want to talk about it from a school safety and from a discussion. Oh Lord, Doc, Bacon is in the comments, so don't even look. Don't even look. I thought Bacon was. I put him on a milk carton because I haven't seen him in forever, and then here he shows up. Anywho, we want to talk about it from a safety, from that face validity member check network perspective. So, before we get started, I wanted to tell a story. I was telling it backstage a little bit. So, when I was teaching martial arts, we would go around and the school districts participated in a program as an after-school program. So I took flyers to the schools for the teachers to hand out to get their children involved in martial arts in the 6 to 8 year old range. And so normally you would have to go up to the school, ring the buzzer to get let in, and go straight to the office, or somebody comes from the office and meets you. But I went to a school. I'm not going to mention a school district, but let's just say it was a challenged area in the Metro Detroit area, right? So, and my school was in Southfield, so you can kind of guess the general region. 8 Mile was just down the road. So I go into this school and the door is standing open. So I pull on the door and there's no one there. And I look both ways. There's no one. I walk from there towards the middle of the school, because I've never been in this school before, and I don't see anyone, but I do see the office. So I walk into the office and there's no one in the office. So I hear some noise coming from an office behind there, and I walk right into the principal's office, and she about had a heart attack because she really totally did not expect someone to just walk in, right? She goes, "How did you get here?" I'm like, "Well, I walked in the door, and you are the very first person that I have encountered." And man, it really shocked her, but that's the reality. I mean, there are rules and things about locking doors, but they don't get followed. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, you said there are rules about locking doors, and the fact is, there are rules if you're in Kentucky. In 2020, Kentucky passed the School Safety and Resiliency Act, which required all inside and outside school doors to be locked during times of instruction, right? So during the school day. So that was 2020. Kentucky required that. Before that, no state required it. Afterwards, because of the pandemic and stuff, it's kind of like, school on and off. It's hard to figure out where that's at. But really, like it was Kentucky. Kentucky also did something in addition to that. They had a compliance officer called a state security marshal, and that person would be tasked with going out to schools and basically checking were your doors locked, right? So it would
Yeah.
show up randomly and then could, issue whatever corrective measures needed to be issued. But and the schools are very against this. So I read numerous testimony from administrators, from teachers in Kentucky saying, "Oh my goodness, like this interferes with our HVAC system. It's so hot now that we have to close the doors. It was never designed for this, and we have to keep the transoms closed or whatever. And we have kindergartners, and they're going to the bathroom all the time, so we have to keep unlocking." And so all these gripes about an improved baseline of security, right? Lock your doors during instructional time. And I think everybody defaults to that right away, Joe, right? Everyone's saying, oh, someone's going to come in with a gun. Well, could be, but you could have somebody just coming into a school. It could be a divorced parent situation, right? Wanting to take a kid for, some custody claim or some spousal fight or whatever it is. But the fact is, right, schools should lock their doors. And we don't have state regulations for that. There's nothing from the Fed. It's up to a board of education. And most boards of education will default it down to their administrative team. Most administrators, if you look at the Parkland handbook today in Florida, the Parkland handbook for locking doors, it'll say teachers should lock their doors. It does not say teachers must lock their doors. So think about that. So whenever you see must versus should, and as an expert witness, I would look for this right away. If you see should is optional. Should means, yeah, it's a good idea, right? But people aren't going to do that. And you really can't hold people accountable for something that is a should. If it's a must, if you're not locking your doors, right? If that isn't ingrained in you to lock your doors, then there's a consequence. Maybe it's a separation from employment. I mean, if this is something that you've done 2 times, right? You haven't locked your door. It's a non-negotiable. So not to frame this all over on a school side, but saying as a school side, as a board of education, every board of education out there in the entire United States, every board could and should enact a policy saying our school doors, our exterior doors, and our classroom doors will be locked during instructional time, and that's a non-negotiable, right? So right there, that's a starting point, and that would significantly increase school safety. What we saw a couple days ago, where was it yesterday? Somebody was trying to gain entry to an elementary school. I say, I think it was yesterday, right? Because the media didn't cover it. But and that because the doors were locked, the person couldn't get in. And I believe they were the police arrived and killed this person. But right, so the thing that is frustrating to me, many things frustrating, but right now, no one is talking about this. Have you heard this on the news? Have you heard this anywhere of how many states require doors to be locked? How many districts require doors to be locked? And how does the process work? No, we haven't heard about it. It immediately jumps to Second Amendment and guns and less guns. And, so this is totally being skipped over. Right. And I don't know exactly what happened in Uvalde. I don't think anybody knows exactly what happened in Uvalde, but we talked about this before. Strange narrative, right? Where the back door is unlocked and then it's propped with a rock. And then it was closed, but it's not locked. And I'm like, that doesn't make sense. At a face validity standpoint, as a safety expert, right? Especially if you pull the door shut, or a rock is going to keep a door open, 6 inches? I mean, you're not having a boulder in front of this door.
So there's a couple of things
crazy
about that. The kind of doors that you have in a school, and this, the teacher can't just lock or unlock the outdoors, the ones that lead outside. That
Right.
You need the Allen tool, right, or a key. But the teacher won't personally have that. That would be someone that an administrator or the cleaning staff has that makes that door locked or unlocked. So on its face, the story makes no sense because the individual teacher would not have had the capability to lock or unlock that door. They would have had the capability to prop it open with a rock, but they wouldn't have the ability to close it but not lock it. So that in and of itself makes no sense. So there was a timeline that came out, and it showed that about 10 minutes before he arrived, the door was open, propped open. But then like 3 minutes before he arrived, it said, no, 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 no. She closed the door. Okay, but that only came out like several hours later. They
Right.
changed the story when probably, as you point out, the district's lawyers were like, no, that door was closed and locked. But again, we have to look at the physics of how this works. I say this all the time. The most important person in any building is a janitor because he's the guy who has all the keys.
Right.
And in all honesty, every teacher does not have all of the keys. They'll have a key to an employee entrance and a key to the teacher's lounge and maybe a key to the teacher's bathroom and their own desk, but they're not going to have the key that locks and unlocks every exterior door. That's something that's going to be controlled more by an administrative person, security person, maintenance staff, whatever. So it doesn't make sense to me that they would be able to just close and unlock a door.
Right. That doesn't make sense to me also. And it doesn't seem like there was a key card system in place here
Right.
because it sounds like it was physical keys, because key card systems, you can, authorize more staff to, use a key card to get into a building or into classrooms.
Right.
And then
And
that's
they
all
can't
recorded.
unlock it at that point either. Right.
Right. So this is and why? So I'm looking at this and saying, out of all the information that's come forward, why is it this piece is crystal clear when everything else is mud? And the fact that you would interview somebody and they'd say, oh yes, like I did remove the rock and the door closed, but I didn't know that it didn't, or I knew that it didn't latch. That's absolutely false. During a heightened chaos event, the people would cleanly remember, the one person would cleanly remember that. I don't think it would stand under cross-examination. And the other part is,
Right.
we all know this, right? I have a door in my garage, and I'm like, if I close it, I have to give it the little tug afterwards to make it click. And you're an educator there. This is the end of the school year. That if there is some special maneuver that needs to make the door click, you would do that, right? So this is bizarre. It seems very much scripted, and I would say I'm highly questionable of this. To the fact I would have to have much more evidence to believe that this happened, that this door actually was closed, and then also that it didn't latch. A number of schools now also have systems where they can tell if their exterior doors
Yep.
are open or closed, and if they're open more than like 100 seconds, a certain door, it'll send a notice out to an administrator or something. So I don't buy that. I don't buy this whole door thing. And
Well, the other thing is no purpose was ever given for the opening of the door.
Right. You said no purpose, and looking, where was the parking lot from this? So right. I'm a former school administrator, right? If someone goes out and they're going to bring something into a classroom, and so what are you carrying that you can't set down, that you have to prop this door? And why wouldn't you just grab a student or a staff member and say, hey, I have to go out to my car. It's, I'm bringing in whatever because it was, I guess, an awards day. Can you stand here for a minute and let me in when I'm approaching the door? Like, that would make sense. Like, that is the face validity sensible thing that would always happen in schools. It's not someone saying, oh, I'm going to find the rock or a rock or whatever, a shoe, and put it in the door. And I'm going to fatigue the safety system to do this. So it doesn't make sense.
And another piece that proves it doesn't make sense is that this particular school has been locked down 40 something times already this year due to external incidents off property.
Absolutely. So
you'd already be aware of a heightened security risk due to its proximity to the border, its proximity to criminal activity. It just does not make any sense.
I'm with you. Absolutely. So right there we have a very stark incongruence with face validity. And so again, I look at that and believe, again, I firmly believe this, that this was someone or the district that was told, you need to change your position because what was initially said creates a substantial liability for the school. But I guess, Joe, and going back, your point of saying, this has been a district that has had multiple lockdowns and things like districts know what to do and they anticipate their safety measures. Like no one is who's worked there a year, especially, a teacher is going to just prop this door to go out and get something from a car. Like
Right.
it just doesn't make sense. Like, to go through into interview, like, why would you do this? And why didn't you just bring it in initially? Or like, why wasn't someone by the door? Like, all these other things of like, getting there. And it's not only that, right? You don't want other things to get into school. I read one district where they propped a door, a snake got in the school. But I mean, so right here, we have a point where I look at that and say, someone's not being truthful.
Right. And Rick puts a comment here in the comment section about $70,000 was spent to harden Uvalde last year. Well, hardening and hardening are two different things, right? So cameras don't actually harden a building, which is probably what most of the money was spent on. Locks harden a building, but they only harden it to the aspect of the fact that you use them, right? If you prop a door open, the money you spent on the lock is irrelevant.
Right.
But one of the things I wanted to get your opinion on this, Doc, was one of the things that I recommend is even just for active shooter prevention, you carry two what's called door wedges in your backpack. And it's really just the same thing you use at home to block a door open. But if I shove it at the top of a door while it's closed, guess what? You can't open that door, right? So, and they make a special kind for school classrooms in this kind of a situation. So why would door wedges not have been something that were used? Apparently the guy moved through the building. Door wedges would have stopped that. He wouldn't have gotten to any rooms.
Right. So I'm not apprised of what, the systems were that they had for fortifying, their interior outside of locking doors. But one of the things that I talked about in my 2019 PBS presentation is there's so much out there for school safety devices, and there is not an underwriter's laboratory. So things are readily marketed to schools, which have never been trialed anywhere, right? So it's kind of a roll of the dice whether something authentically works or it doesn't. But if it is a door, wedge, for example, or replacing your doors with solid core doors. The only time, there's never been a active shooter situation in a school where a shooter has been able to shoot through a code compliant door and a door lock. Red Lake, Minnesota, it was the glass, which was shattered out. Missy Dodds, who I know is a friend, who was the teacher in that classroom. The glass was shot out, and that was a way that the intruder got in. But the lock itself took 3 rounds and was still holding up. So, the $70,000, right? If you have solid core, doors and locks, you're largely in good shape, with that. With these other systems, as you said, Joe, I mean, those, I think it goes back to, if we look at the timeline, when did people know that they needed to start the lockdown process? Because it seems, right, the shooter shoots his grandmother, then he's on a run from the police, in his truck, crashes his truck, and the school police or the school's aware that he's on premises. But like, at what point does a lockdown alert get issued? Because from the time that alert gets issued and the school actually, all the doors are secured in any type of, if it's a barricade procedure or whatever that they do, it's probably 30 seconds. Like, schools are really fast on that. But like, when did that happen? So it comes into this, we don't know that. We do not know from Uvalde when the school was told to go into lockdown, which is crazy, right? That we don't know that now, that isn't out there saying at this point the school district issued, or how it was issued, right? Or who issued it, or even the police. Like, this is crazy because the police, that's one thing. And, anytime you have somebody in a vehicle, right, and they're approaching a school, it's a police chase, right? And is that I was in a situation, right, where I was a school administrator and the police contacted and said, this person could be nearing your school within, 2 minutes, right, or a minute. and we went into lockdown, right? They weren't and necessarily coming to the school, but they might, ram their vehicle up against a school or a school parking lot. There might be like a standoff there. So, this thing is crazy because as the vehicle got in proximity to the school, right, the police should have notified the school and said, go to lockdown. We have a situation, or if it's across the road, domestic incident, whatever, like go to lockdown. So we need to know from a school standpoint, are you being notified, or who's notifying, or who has discretion? I talk about this all the time. In 1958, the Our Lady of Angels school fire in Chicago, 90 more than 90 students and nuns perished in that. And what happened was, it's a fire at the end of the day, right? And a couple, nuns, teachers are aware of it. They can see the smoke, but they're trying to find, the person to make the decision, the principal, sister superior, whatever. And by the time they find her, it's too late. So if they would have just pulled the fire alarm, but they didn't, they felt they had to find the person who could activate the lockdown. So that's another part in Uvalde is who had discretion to activate the lockdown? Why wasn't it activated sooner? It definitely
Well, see, that's a really good question because for some reason that school district has its own police department.
Right.
And I'm not advocating for or against that. The Detroit Public Schools here has them. The Lansing Public Schools has them. But they had their own police department. So they would have had some sort of radio commonality with the city, where at least their dispatchers would be monitoring the city radio traffic. That's how they knew to hold all the other lockdowns they had all year, right? Was simply by monitoring city radio traffic and said, hey, cops are looking for somebody over here. The city cops are, we should probably lock down this school. So that's a big question. But hold on, Watcher, I want you to scroll back up to the top of that story you're on right now. I have pointed this out all the way to the top where it talks about his Facebook message. Oh, no. I didn't mean there. Where he talked about the Facebook message. Right there. So I have mentioned this several times. Read that first sentence out loud, Watcher.
The shooter sends private Facebook message to a girl in Germany he met online and tells her about his plans to shoot his grandmother. The gunman shoots his grandmother in the face.
I have pointed out that's good enough. That's good enough. I have pointed out repeatedly that when you look at things like, and we're not going to go too deep into conspiracy theory land, but I do have some tinfoil right handy. But when you look at things like the Las Vegas shooting, the man who blew himself up in Nashville, and when you look at a lot of these very unusual shootings, you find two things. One, a history of repeated contact with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Okay. We know that that's the case in this one. Then you also find this situation right here, the random girl. If you remember in Nashville, this man randomly gave his house to a woman who claims to not know him. I'm not about to give my house to somebody I've never met.
Boy, isn't it interesting that she's a German girl and that instantly activates the ability for them to spy on him through a foreign capacity and all the messages that he sends back and forth. I mean, it's just
exactly right. Exactly right. And then when you look at the Las Vegas shooting, we had a girl from the Philippines who disappears into ISIS country in the Philippines almost immediately. I'm just pointing out that they all have this common pattern of the newly met girl. So, anywho, but back to the topic at hand. I saw that go by and I wanted to address it right then. That's an interesting fact pattern that applies to an awful lot of these shootings. Almost as if somebody was on the other end of that computer who might have been somewhere in McLean, Virginia, telling him they were in Germany. But
hey, Anon, you should really do the terrible thing.
Yes, you should do the terrible thing. But anyway, on that issue, it should have been automatic, and I don't understand why they didn't happen in this.
Well, and I wanted to point this out. According to the article, like when he got there, he crashed in the thing, and within 2 minutes started firing at people, and somebody immediately, like here at 9:30, which is 2 minutes after he crashes into a ditch, a teacher calls 911, which because it is the district's own police force, theoretically, that should have automatically.
Yes.
Yep, and then a minute later, he's in the parking lot, and by then, Doc, you know this better than I do. They probably should have the doors locked by then, right?
Yeah. Not only that, right? They would have had an administrative team going to double check all of the doors, immediately dispatched that everything was secured, numerous announcements going down. So yeah, the school itself would have been completely locked down and everybody fortified, right? And looking at this too, then I would have believed that the proximal law enforcement would have taken positions around the school to start protecting the school, anticipating that this person could make entrance into that
Mhm.
area where you'd have, of course, vulnerable populations. So, um, yeah, we do not know, yeah, a specific time
When you look at
where,
this from a police tactical
yeah,
response thing, your point is well taken. They would have immediately established a perimeter to protect the building. And where is the best observation post to be able to see people approaching that building? Right in the parking lot. And yet that didn't happen. The parking lot's a wide open expanse. I should have been able to see them coming.
right,
So
right, yeah, yeah. So
Apologies, I'm at the high school. I need to go to the elementary.
So a considerably frustrating part of this is, so let's even remove the door part of this. Let's say that the door wasn't opened, right? That the door was locked, and somehow this the shooter was able to breach the door, get into the building. Um, if you are now a school administrator, and I will address this in my fall classes, I'm already modifying the syllabi to include these case studies. What's your thought process, right? If you aren't convinced that your local law enforcement or even your school district enforcement is going to intervene, then what is your next step? It's a terrifying thought. What are you going to do to secure your building after this? Because, and I think every school district around the country is asking that question right now. Well, what if our local police department isn't going to intervene? Or again, we go back to Parkland. We start to see patterns in some of this, going all the way back to Columbine, the long delay for Denver SWAT to come in, and also what our insurance carrier is going to say to their school districts, or what is their expectation going to be for on-site security. I don't know. But it's kind of like, what if you do everything right as a school, right? What if you do everything right? You've locked your doors, you've gone into your positions, whatever, you've barricaded, everything is intact, and yet somehow this person gains entrance to the facility and then the police don't intervene. You've done everything on your side that you were supposed to do, and the law enforcement side didn't do
well,
what they
but
needed
here's
to
the
do.
thing. You brought up the insurance thing, right? So as a guy, as a consultant in the security business, I get called a lot of times into security liability cases, right?
Yeah.
So it said in that story that Watcher was scrolling through that the automatic lock failed. Um, that 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 that's just that right there is silliness. That should be a checklist every single morning and every single night, that if those locks are working, right? And if those locks aren't working, you make a phone call, and by the end of the day, the locksmith is out to fix the lock. Um, you would at least have a working ticket from whomever you called to fix that lock. But when you say, hey, it's a school and we need this lock fixed, they're going to fix the lock that day, right?
Oh,
So
absolutely.
there's some liability on that standpoint.
There would be, right? And one
Yeah.
of the things, for example, when I would do lockdowns as an administrator, we had certain things that we assessed. One, was every door locked, or if it wasn't locked, was it because of failure in the mechanical structure of the door? And sometimes that happened, right? Like, for some reason a door just didn't lock, but then, right, it was immediately addressed, and we did that every single time. Was the public address system functioning? Could you hear it in different areas of the building? So that's very commonplace and very I should say thorough in most schools that conduct these types of safety drills. So right, the school would have known about this. And again, I still grapple with how did you remove a rock and the door didn't latch, or even if it didn't latch, that you wouldn't have actually pulled that door, right? That you wouldn't have waited that
Yeah.
1-2 seconds, because at that time the shooter wasn't 10 feet away. But yeah, I'm with you. Anything that's door related in schools, or especially exterior doors, is immediately addressed. And usually that is always a part of a checklist by the administrative team when there's a lockdown.
And like you said, it's not just about active shooters. It's about custodial disputes. It's about children walking off.
It is.
It's about homeless people. There's a lot of other potential risks involved in a school. So that should be on there. So what I would be interested to see is what sort of audit logs there were. And if you can show that they were just pencil whipping that audit, signing off
Right.
on it every day, that I've been checking that, because that happens a lot. That's a problem. So I think what we saw here was a decision by the school district lawyers to say, well, there's a lot of liability if we left that door open on purpose, but there's a little less liability, even though it's still bad, if the door was broken. So let's go with broken. So,
Right. In which you should be able to absolutely determine in a forensic analysis, right?
yeah.
Through
Well, especially if it's a mechanical, or if it's an electromagnetic lock, there will be a trail of when that door last worked and when it did not. So-
Absolutely. So let's get into an area, as you said, Joe. What is reported and what's accountability for schools? And the reality is, so even if states require schools to do safety drills and have safety plans, and not all states do that, by the way, just so you know, like, that's not a requirement from every state. Where I live in Wisconsin, it's the Department of Justice took over school safety about 4 or 5 years ago. And the reason they did it, because it was, I think, under the Department of Professional Services before that. And I did this in my PBS presentation in 2019. It's one of the earlier slides. It was just a one-sheet document you turned into the state every year and said, oh, yeah, we did our fire drill on this date, our active shooter on this date, our tornado drill on this date. And like, that was it. It wasn't like, did it work? Was it good? Can we give you feedback, from the state professionals of how to improve this? Was your insurance company involved? Was anybody from the county emergency services there looking? It wasn't. It was just, as you said, a checklist. And it wasn't, and the people didn't turn in the list, and there wasn't a consequence. But even now in Wisconsin, with the Department of Justice, you have to turn in your blueprints of your school. Okay, I guess. And then you have to turn in a notice in a board of education meeting that every January that you've had your school of education, your board of education has met, and they've talked about your school safety plan, and that your drill with like the police, like, that's all addressed at a board meeting, which really means, like, I can write up a paragraph in a monitoring report for a board meeting if I'm a principal, and that would suffice, right? It can be just something where you have a vote and it's boom, it's in record. So it's not where the state or the county or even local police, anybody is coming in and saying, oh, like, here's what you did well, or here's ways we can improve the drill. Like your two-way radio communications. I've seen people, when they grabbed their radios and they went outside and they were trying to talk about, oh, like, I have my class here. They didn't know what channel to turn to. Like, like, that'd be helpful. No one requires that at all. Nobody requires that.
Right.
So that was something in School of Errors I pointed out, as saying, it's nuts that we have billions of dollars spent on, bollards, for example. And I think, bollards are pretty ridiculous, but, and, we don't talk about two-way communications, and we don't measure these things. Or when law enforcement came up, oh, did they know where to stage? Like, what was most effective for staging your resources, or to set up a perimeter, or, things like this. So, so as you said, checklist, yes. And also this, where I talked about Kentucky, where Kentucky has this marshal who goes around to schools and checks their buildings and checks their doors, right? Like, nobody has that. And you submit these things to the state saying, here's our school safety plan. The state puts it in a file. There's nobody at the state looking at that and saying, well, I think this is good, or we're going to give some feedback, right? So a lot of this really is districts are on their own to do this. And there is no best practice model. There's nobody giving feedback to this, even though they'll tell you, yes, like we have the Texas School Safety Organization or whatever it is. That's, that's just not accurate, right? If you actually were to do a discovery, a legal discovery with them of like, what schools have you gone to on what dates and stuff, they wouldn't provide you any of that stuff, right?
Yeah.
Because they don't do it.
Just I
Well,
just
that's
wanted
also
to,
why. Oh, go ahead.
this
Go
is
ahead,
just an
Wes.
interesting piece that came up while we were scrolling through these articles. This is something that I hadn't caught before. It appears that the one who there's a question about what happened with the rock on the door and the teacher. That teacher is also apparently the one that was on the phone with 911 reporting that there was a shooter.
Well, and like Doc said earlier, it's a very odd thing to remember, right?
Right.
I mean, with all of the other things going on, that sounds like a lawsuit defense as opposed to something she actually remembers. So, and you mentioned that whole liability thing just a second ago, Doc. When I do a security survey, everyone wants me to mark it as prepared in preparation of litigation, right?
Okay.
To make it protected from discovery. Because I frequently do exactly what we just talked about. I'll say, okay, so show me your daily audit logs of your locks and doors. Well, we don't do it daily, we do it weekly. Okay, let me see them. They show me them, and one of the things that I do is point out, okay, well, they've been marking that this lock has been checked, or this door has been checked once a week for the last 6 weeks. But 5 weeks ago, the workers in the area said that lock stopped working, but your plant foreman or whatever keeps saying that it is. And I imagine if that happens in a manufacturing facility or in a office setting, I imagine it happens even more so in a public servant school setting.
Sure.
Where we're just signing off on the paperwork because we sign off on it every day. And that doesn't mean someone physically went and checked it. There's a reason why checklists exist, and they're for you to actually go out and do the work. And that's a big risk. Big risk.
It is. It's actually worse than that. So it's worse than that.
Yeah.
I had a student in my superintendent class 2 years ago, and I have the videos and all the evidence to back this up. So in my state, the state Department of Justice had a catalog of approved locks and barricade devices and so forth that schools could order through a fund, through a grant, right? Saying, hey, like if you want to go with this double locking mechanism for your door, we'll pay for it as the DOJ. Just tell us how many you need. So one of the districts ordered these locks for 100-year-old middle school. And what happened? So it was a double locking mechanism. The door would have its normal locking mechanism. There was another one down below. So you turn basically like a knob, and it would do a second deadbolt. So
yeah,
in
hey, Watch,
theory,
I just said something like that to your Twitter DMs to put up while he talks about it. Go ahead, Don.
In theory, not a bad thing, right? But what happened was, before school started, one of these locks failed, right? So a teacher was there, couldn't unlock her classroom, couldn't undo the second lock. It was just her. It failed again a second time. It failed a third time, and they had to kick out the bottom of the door to gain access to the classroom. So what was happening was this was faulty. The Department of Justice at the state knew it was faulty. The principal contacted them and said, these locks are failing throughout our building. Like, what do we do? Like, do we try to reinstall the old ones? Is there tech that can come out? I got involved personally in that. Worked with the National Institute of Door Hardware, and we were able to get that resolved. But my question then to the state was, are you letting the other districts know about this? The other 100 districts that bought these for their doors? This is faulty. This doesn't work. And no response, right? So another thing is there's a big pay to play here. It's called the 74 million, which is a investigative magazine journalist. They said, like the school superintendent organization at national level you can pay a certain amount of money and then your product is endorsed, right? That was their claim of saying you can kind of pay to get an endorsement. But, if there is a faulty lock, as you said, Joe, let's say like this lock is faulty, there's more of a responsibility with that. It's not only to fix it, it's to then make the lock company aware, and that they should be mandated to send out a bulletin, right? Or that they should have an inquiry to other places that have bought these and say, hey, we've been informed that there are some issues with this. Are you experiencing the same thing? That doesn't happen. And it didn't happen at Department of Justice level here in Wisconsin. I have the videos. I actually did a testimony on that, a congressional, or not, a state testimony, which I've recorded. Again, I have to say some of these things because they're not public, right? And if somebody says, "Oh, that doesn't happen," well, I have the actual visual evidence. I have the principle. I have the locks. I have when it was kicked in and the fire department responding, because they don't want it to be out there, right? So that's another thing with accountability. If this is something, and I don't believe this lock just failed one time, like it was a one-off. If this was a problematic lock, then you had an obligation to fix it and replace it. It's just insane.
So I wanted to talk about this picture right here that I have up. So this is a door in a secured facility, as you can tell, and this is a safe haven room. And what we call a safe haven room in the protection business is this is where you would take the client that you are protecting, right? The reason why he has bodyguards, you would take him to this room, close that door, throw that bolt, right? And if you look, that bolt goes towards the lock and then up above the lock and down below the lock. The first thing is you can't install these on anything but a solid core door. If you do, it just makes it easier to break the door in because the bar breaks the door, right? But this thing right here secures someone in there. So this is a safe haven room. We're supposed to bring him in here and keep him safe until response forces get here. Yeah, it's like a panic room. Somebody just put in there. Yeah, this is actually a panic room. But what do you see wrong with this picture? Or what the reason why I took this picture as a detail leader? The door is propped open.
Yep.
So it does me no good to have a safe haven that I can take my client to if there was already a bad guy hiding in the room because you left the door propped open.
Right.
Can I ask
scenario as the school? I can invest. I mean, that door is a solid steel door that's going to stop. That door is very heavy and hard to move, for the record, right? It's going to stop bullets. It's reinforced there against a battering ram. You're not getting through that door without explosives, right? But it's propped open. So all that money spent is wasted.
Can I ask something real quick?
There's a gun safe in that room, by the way.
I just have to satisfy my curiosity. Is the term safe haven room versus panic room because no VIP wants to be told that they're going to a panic room?
That they're panicking? Yeah, they don't want to be told they're going to a panic room. Well, safe haven versus panic are two different things. Panic is where you go to wait for me to come and get you. A safe haven is where we put you while we defend the building. Big difference.
Right.
One is a waiting rescue. One is, look, if they get through us, man, you're going to die in that room. So
here's the Wisconsin one. Thank you, by the way.
So I use that in a presentation for a professional school organization. So that's actually part of a presentation that is behind a paywall. But that is authentic. That was a superintendent in my class. And, the superintendent said, here it is. And I actually have video, but, here are some still pictures 2 years ago. So the lock failed. And then as they tried to have the Department of Justice intervene and provide some remedy, because this is where they were able to get the funding ultimately in order through catalog. I intervened directly to the National Hardware Institute, which helps adhere the codes in buildings. And we were able to get this resolved at a building at that building level. But actually, here's what initially the company said. Well, it's humidity related, or maybe, go in and it's an insulation issue or whatever. It's like, no, these are faulty. And not only that, you couldn't get out of the room. So that was the issue here. You could not exit the room. So they had to, again, kick in. And as you see that area in the bottom and then, somebody, reach up and be able to get into that. But so
is that a glass panel in the door?
It looks like it is glass up above. I'd have to go back to the
It's probably reinforced though, and that's why they didn't go through the glass. So
yeah, it does look like
yeah, it's reinforced. So
it's a very thick, heavy door. But this comes into I think what we're going to see after Uvalde is this whole thing of school safety experts, right? Anybody can be an expert in school safety, selling all kinds of devices and apps. I already had somebody contact me and say, oh, like I have this app. And I think they wanted to, kind of gauge, like, would you get behind endorsing this? Well, I don't do that. I'm not your endorsement guy, but an app, because here's Uvalde, right? If you would have had an app and anybody could have pressed it, it would have notified and you could have done the lockdown sooner. I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, hypothetically, right? But it comes down to discretion. Like anybody, like this teacher should have known. The police, as they get proximal to a school and this kid crashes this vehicle next to the school, like they should have known. So it's like trying all these little gadget tricks aren't going to make your school safer, right? It's ways that a sponge is going to soak up money.
Well,
So-
it's just like any physical security or cyber security. It's only as good as the individual links in the chain that are using it, and it's almost always human failure in all of these different things.
Yep. If you got two-factor authentication on your computer system, but you
Right.
have the passwords written right next to it, it's worthless.
So yeah, and I feel I've been talking a lot about the school district, and I think there is merit in that, and there is also merit of the fact that so what will happen in this, right, is the school district's legal counsel, which is funded by their insurance company, their errors and omissions legal counsel will have come in and taken grabs of every hard drive, every video, anything with the doors, which would indicate if they were open or closed, if there was some remote sensing. All of that would already be captured as evidence for discovery when this actually obviously will go to litigation. But the fact that we haven't had that come out from a public investigation from law enforcement on this is bizarre. It's we look at other things that happen and it gets very minute of the detail that comes out about things, and here it's extremely bizarre. And it's also bizarre, I think, because of the number of people who are there, who are recording with their phones, who are observing things and all that information, again, which would come into a timeline. But again, I live in Wisconsin, where we had the Waukesha Parade massacre, right? Was that in December or January? And that was memory hold. I mean, that basically vanished in days.
That was the day when the car attacked people.
Speaking
not
of which,
the
I
black
don't.
Hebrew Israelite
Terrific.
adherent.
Speaking of which, I don't get to do this often, but if you go to the Watcher on the Web channel, that is one of the first videos I have available. There is a very long and detailed video breakdown from every cell phone and applicable security camera video I could find, breaking down the incident beat by beat. So
Nice.
I don't have a big channel and I haven't updated it in a while, but I'm probably going to start doing that now. But that's on there.
And what you're doing, Watcher, is absolutely correct, right? It's this whole thing, provenance, Provenanca, I guess. I never want a spelling bee, but it's in the velocity of information. It's very important. Joe is an expert with this. It is establishing what happened when and from like what perspective. Like, was this video clip taken from this hallway camera at what time, what angle?
Well, and
all of that.
I went through great effort to try and find images of the exact spot where the photographer was standing that was taking it during a time when it was peaceful,
Right.
and so be able to tie it to the actual neighborhood itself.
And that's what we did with the Grand Rapids police shooting too, right? We actually married up all of the videos on the same timeline so that you were seeing all of it in real time.
Absolutely, Joe. And so we come to this, and I've been, I have, connections in the Uvalde area, and very thoroughly been having them check and say, is anybody in law enforcement or with the insurance company or anybody saying, if you have video or audio, or even want to give a testimony to like what, if you were there and you were seeing things, here's a number to call, here's a website to go to. None of that. And it didn't exist. It did not exist either for Waukesha, even though, again, at a parade, people have their cameras out and things like that. It didn't exist. So by omission, to me, that is very telling. And that's something I also think should be part of, if there is an act of violence against a school, whether it doesn't have to be a school shooting, anything that's an act of violence against a school, there should be a mandatory opening of a window where you're publicly soliciting information, whether it's somebody's ring cam on their door. And again, I know some of this can be manipulated, whatever, but you're trying we live in a technology age that you're trying to gather this information, these technological bits that might be out there to establish metadata and provenance, which you didn't have 10 years ago. It's his gift. And we don't have that. Why not? Why isn't that in the bill that went before Congress versus, oh, we have to have magazines which limit to whatever?
Well,
why isn't that in the bill?
Forget a bill before Congress. I mean, look, I come from kind of an interesting background, and I don't like to get too much into what I did after I got out of the military, just because I don't want to dox myself. But I happen to know for a fact that there are marketing companies out there that can know exactly who was there and exactly what they were doing on their phone at that exact moment, and could produce a product to sell to law enforcement that would automatically geo-canvas all those people. It's there are so many solutions to this, but it is almost as though it's purposely being ignored.
It doesn't, the legislative activities, whether it be a state level, again, 400 bills a year get proposed at a state level or at a national level, do not match the solutions that would make the most impact, right? And you see that, I see that. I was reading through a recent post by Mike Dorn, who's an expert in school safety. Mike Dorn can trump people who, I look up to as the lighthouses in school safety, in saying, the legislation isn't matched to steps we know that would contribute to increased school safety. Again, locking all doors, having a mandated reporting process of if there is like a faulty lock or something that goes out to other districts that might have the same lock or whatever, and policies that have the words must versus should, and that you're backed up if you have a must policy, as an administrator, that you have more teeth to enforce that, right? More consequences to enforce it.
That goes right to this question we have up on the screen right now. You think the delay in response was caused by the chain of command telling him not to enter, or was it caused by cops getting cold feet? So we've already seen the actual policy from both the school district police and the city police, both of which state that you must immediately enter and proceed to engage the hostile threat.
Well,
that has been the policy. Statement? What's that?
Did you guys see this new statement did you guys see the new statement that was put out by the supposed commander on the scene? He just put it out a few hours before we went live. Apparently he's lawyered up, but he put out a statement saying that he didn't know that he was in charge of the scene and he never ordered anyone not to come in.
Garbage,
that's ridiculous.
It's all garbage.
But the point is this, that we have standard operating procedures in the law enforcement and security world, because you don't have time to wait for someone to give a command. Right. So for example, in the executive protection world, if someone fires a shot, the person closest to the shot engages that person. Everyone else takes the client 180 degrees away from the gunfire, right? And you move until you are out of there. The same situation is here. Ever since the day after Columbine, every U.S. law enforcement agency in America has had the same policy, and that is that the first officer on scene at most waits for one other officer. But if another officer does not come in the first minute or two, he immediately makes entry, proceeds immediately to the threat, and engages the threat. That didn't happen here, and I can't understand why. Now, I can see when people mention the fear angle, and I can see that, like when we're at when we're talking about Marjorie Stoneman Douglas there in Parkland, the one guy saying, well, I was afraid. But that didn't impact the remainder of the officers who arrived. They needed to be done, right? Went looking for the suspect and moved on. But in this one, none of the officers entered the building, right? And there's even some details that some of the officers might have entered the building, got their own children, and then left.
Well, and that's what we've got right here.
I can't understand.
Right.
Yeah. You can't say that it was fear of being engaged by the criminal that made an entire group of trained and prepared law enforcement people stop what they are doing. And I've just got to be honest, I've got to rant a little bit here, but I understand they restrained some parents who insisted on being allowed in there to go and get their kids.
Right.
You didn't have enough cops and enough bullets there to stop me from going in that building, even if my children weren't in there. If I arrive on a scene and I say, hey, what's going on? Like, well, there's an active shooter in there. And I'm like, why are you guys standing around? Well, we're not going in right now. You don't have enough guys to keep me from going in and saving children I don't know. Even if I'm not armed, I'm going to do it. So I don't understand the story here. The story is that they were. Hold on, let me finish. I've got to get it out, or it'll eat me up all day.
Gotcha.
The story is one of two things: they were ordered not to, or they were afraid. One, a group can't all be afraid, and two, you can't order me to let people die. I'm sorry, but that is not lawful in any way, shape, or form. I'm going to say, screw you, I'm going to go get it. And we saw this in another police shooting. I mentioned this the other day. A few months ago, there was a guy who was holding a child hostage, and he's getting in a shootout with the police, and a police sniper shoots the kid, right, or shoots the bad guy. And they all immediately start running up. And one of the sergeants says, hold on, wait a minute. And the sniper who shot the bad guy said, screw that, I'm getting that kid. And he ran and got the kid anyway, disobeying the officer. I just can't understand why either of these things would work. So I'm sorry, Watcher. Go right ahead.
Well, no, I'm actually going to turn it over to Doc first. What besides the badass Lance Corporal helmet, what are we looking at here, Doc?
Right. So, as a school administrator, which I was at the time that photo was taken, I spent entire days doing entry, where we would have one or multiple people role playing as the shooters, right? So that was a picture taken from that. I also did entry into buildings that weren't schools. Like I went and trained with our local and regional, which was a metro police department, because I wanted to know this as an administrator. What are you thinking? What's the process? What is a diamond entry? I don't know this, but give me some knowledge, because I want to make sure that my processes, my procedures, and what I'm telling people is informed, right? That I know what to expect. And the expectation, right, when they were coming on scene, is that, as Joe had said, if there was more than one person, there would quickly be established an entry team, and there was not a delay of trying to set up an incident command structure, or like, well, is it this person has authority or this person? I mean, it could be whether it be county or state patrol or local, whatever it was. There was entry. It always happened that way, and we did multiple drills where it was once I think it was 3 people on scene, the entry happened, right? These were in community school districts, so it was a pretty rapid response, and also state patrol headquarters was there. So I look at this and I'm really perplexed, right? Because if I'm a school administrator and I've gone through this, right? Let's say that's me in Uvalde. If I'm in Uvalde and I've done this training with the police, and then the police don't do that response, what am I supposed to do? What do I say to parents? What do I say to teachers? We trained for this, but then when it came time to implement it during an authentic event, we didn't implement it, or they didn't implement it. And again, a school police force hired by the district, funded by the district, decided not to go into the school. Or went into the school, but decided not to engage the shooter, right? So this is really, again, it starts to create this massive erosion in school safety, because if you do these things as a school, right, you've done your part, right, of securing your school. You have all your doors locked. The things are barricaded, whatever. You've announced it, and then if an intruder is on scene and police don't engage that intruder, what's next? I mean, again, is it the school's council coming out or the school's insurance company saying, well, listen, like, you're going to have your own security now for schools, and schools will go to the state and say, we need funding for on-site security. Or there's also this whole thing of immunity, right? And the privilege of, there's a very high level of immunity in schools. And this probably extends to police working in schools, I would assume, of that. if you try to litigate against them, it's very difficult to prove that they've done something egregious, right? That they've acted outside of policy. So as long as they're following kind of policy or protocol, they're typically protected under these things. So I'll be honest, guys. What I'm trying to wrangle with right now is when I teach this class in fall, I know that superintendents will raise their hand and say, Dr. Perrodin, what if we do all of those things that we're supposed to do as a school, and then an intruder's here, the police show up and they don't engage the intruder, and our staff and students are killed methodically, and they're not coming in. Then what? And it's that social contract, right, that's broken, and it's broken right now. So I don't have an answer to that. And is the answer then every school needs to take it upon their own responsibility to have their defensive force available to them, security, armed security, and things like that? Is that if the police aren't going to jump in and intervene in this when somebody is inside of the building? I don't know. So I wasn't at this point. I wasn't at this point before. I didn't anticipate that this would happen. As Uvalde unfolds, even as Parkland unfolded, right? I mean, it's really precarious. I guess maybe it's grandstanding or bravado to say, if I was in this role, I would go in. Like if I believed I could buy time or neutralize, eliminate, distract, or whatever this person for the lives of those others, I would do it. There's not a hand on, as Joe, even you said, is coming into that building. And also, I mean, what if you're a police officer and somebody, comes forward and they're a law-abiding, caring citizen, and do you deputize them on the spot? Or these are the points where we need to have clear legislative position on this. Just as I said, kind of with that drone example earlier, which is similar in regard to kind of how you'd have to think through that. But we need to have this very clear. And if kids are at risk and you can intervene to, potentially mitigate that. I did interviews with Cajun Navy Relief, Katie Pashon of Cajun Navy Relief a couple of years ago. So Cajun Navy Relief comes in after hurricanes in Louisiana, Texas, California, and they're bringing in boats and they're rescuing people. And now the legislators will say, I don't know about this, because like if you are rescuing someone and you cross a power line and your boat is electrified and everybody dies, like who's responsible? And eventually, like most of them just agreed, okay, we're going to let Cajun Navy come in and help us and do what they need to do because we don't have these resources. But then there were this other group of saying, oh, like we want to legislate Cajun Navy and we want them to work with FEMA and go through this whole hierarchy. And I'm like, then it wouldn't happen. But it's the same thing here. This whole thing of having these debates of, oh, should it be, that you can have a magazine that can hold X number of whatever? That's not the thing, right? It's, if you have a Joe Polio there, deputize him in an instant and get him, there or whatever. Or if you're not going to come into buildings,
I don't need him to deputize me. I'm a citizen of the United States.
Right. Be transparent to these schools.
You're going to have to shoot me.
Well, I mean, you know what? I mean, I don't know how seriously you want to take me because I'm a digital ghost on the internet, right? But I was a former marksmanship instructor in the Marine Corps. I've been saying this since when I was in, and now that I'm out, I really, really believe it. I believe we need to bring marksmanship teams back into high schools. Absolutely. Yeah. Without hesitation. I believe that there is a teacher in the chat who said it. It's gone by Vanessa, I believe, who said that she's also a teacher and believes teachers should be armed. I believe that's also true. Now, I want to address something because I've heard a lot of pushback on the Twitter side of things about, we've got these teachers trying to groom kids, and do we really want to arm them? Yes, I do, 100%. Because even if they're just going to try and save their own life, they're likely to at least buy those kids some time, if nothing else. I don't see any situation in which this isn't beneficial. I only see obstacles to it politically.
Well, and I also recommend that literally everyone, and your children even starting at 6, 7, or 8, get them involved in martial arts. Not yes. Because you think they're going to get out there and kick someone's butt, but it builds confidence, and it does build that emergency ability should it ever be needed.
Well,
um,
and honestly,
to
people
deal
don't
with
talk
it.
about this enough. The thing it builds the very most is it actually gives you the ability to think when you're getting hit in the face, which is it is legitimately like the most useful thing you could possibly learn is how to think under pressure.
And I guarantee you that the students who take martial arts are better students in school because discipline is built into them. So
Yeah, right on. So I wrote about that in School of Airs, that the ability to make a decision, especially under chaos, right? If you've practiced that, you're much better off. And the example, I gave a few examples, but one was on 9/11, the Twin Towers, right? So there were people who saw the flaming debris falling past their window. They stayed at their desk and they were saving their documents, on September 11, 2001,
yeah.
before they exit because, oh, if I don't save this and the power goes out, it's lost. They didn't recognize it. It didn't sink into them. They didn't have that situational awareness. They didn't close the gap between a chaos event and reaction. That's what you have to do. Chaos event and reaction, you have to close that gap. Whatever you do, like you're trying to close that gap. That's the whole thing.
Well,
And
yeah, Boyd's OODA loop, right? I mean, like, why?
yeah,
Here's an interesting question: why isn't that specifically taught in class? Because not only would it get the teachers thinking more about it, it would get the students thinking more about it. They'd become better thinkers overall, and
right,
it would allow them to respond
right.
better. But specifically, it would allow them to respond better to situations like this. Why did I have to get into the Marine Corps before I learned about Boyd's OODA loop?
You're right on. Not only that, and I talked about this in 2019 in the PBS presentation. Not only that, but what if there's a fire, or what if they're on their way home from school and they're in a car accident, and now they have to learn right how to get out of the accident, how to check their environment, how to check. I mean, all of these things. There's actually something called REMS, Readiness and Emergency Management Center, REMS, TA. They do this type of thing. They come into schools, and they'll teach kids, like middle school, high school kids, like how to crib a car if it's like, been in an accident, stuff like that. And they actually do this. Like, I think New Mexico requires all their kids to go through this. But um, you're right on. Why are we not teaching situational awareness and responses to chaos situations or crisis situations, Kim's game, things like this, decision making? All it makes sense, right? Why are we not
Well,
doing this?
and it seems low cost, right?
It is.
Because
That's part of the thing. You just mentioned low cost. Not only low cost, no cost. REMS TA, no cost. If I'm a vendor, my state, just puts out, $500 million for school safety. A vendor can't sell you this stuff that you have on the screen in front of you, or doing Kim's game, or to, what we've just talked about, geocaching type things, activities, right? So you can understand geospatial type stuff and navigating or whatever. All of those things are free. You can't
well,
make money off of free things. That's why you never hear about it. It's never at a conference.
and can we maybe, like, if we're going to make proposals about this, just as a person who did instruction for a number of years, I learned more about marksmanship doing instruction than I had ever learned prior to that. Can we make sure that, like, the teachers are
Yeah.
each getting a chance rotating teaching this to their each specific kids, so they're also
Right.
getting this drilled further into their heads, because it's a double whammy?
No, you're right on. Right. You're right on.
Right
So
on.
exactly. And we pause. And the question is, so why isn't this out there? Why isn't this what's being talked about on a national level for, our new, safety in schools bill will include in specific instruction on situational awareness, and like Kim's game, and teaching responses to decrease the time from a chaos event. Discretion, an activity, for example, of I had a friend of mine who's a principal. We were talking a couple of weeks ago. He said, "Hey, I want to do like a start of school activity on school safety, but I kind of want to do something out of the box. What do you think?" I'm like, "Here's the deal: get a couple stack of post-it notes, and with your staff, when you're done with your first meeting, say, here, take a post-it note, and I want you to put it on the AED that's closest to your classroom, the defibrillator device that's in the hallway somewhere."
Yep.
And then later, he would go and check and see that everybody had it. And then people would say, "I had no idea where it was. I've taught here for 12 years. I have no idea where the thing is," right? So all of these things that make sense as we are talking about now, those are nowhere to be found in state legislation, local board of education, or at the federal level. What is it? It's 2A. It's going after 2A. And again, this is sensible. This is research based. I have just tons of citations in my book. I have tons of citations in the Velocity of Information. There's no counter argument to what we are saying. And it not only applies to schools, again, as Joe, if it's a car accident, right? It's a vehicle accident, as REMS TA would teach you. If you're in a vehicle accident, here's what should happen. Like the vehicle should be turned off because carbon monoxide could be entering the vehicle. You need to check because there could be live wires or something else. I mean, they teach kids things that are practical and generalizable. But where do we go and what do we get told and what does the media get told and whatever? It's not only that, and then it broadens out, right? Because now if you're a gun owner, you're also a Christian, and if you're a Christian, then you're a nationalist. You're a gun-owning Christian nationalist, and these are all bad things. And it gets so far off from what is authentically school safety. And that's where I get really passionate about it. And I'm glad I'm able to do that because I'm not tied to a contract where I'm an administrator.
Yeah.
Because, right, you couldn't say this if you were an administrator. You just couldn't. Even though every administrator in my class, the door's closed and they'll say, this is crazy. Like, this is what we should be doing. And this is what we're being told. And this is what the parents expect from what the media is telling them. So I appreciate this because, I mean, you can tell, like, I'm fired up.
I love it. I might get in trouble for this, but how hard it must be to actually be trying to solve problems in the midst of a color revolution. It's
true that. Declar posted somebody posted a Bible verse in there about helping. This is the one that actually applies directly to those police officers. So if you watch this, I'm going to tell you, Proverbs 24:11. This is so vital. Rescue those being led away to death. Hold back those staggering towards the slaughter. It is your job, your responsibility, not just as a police officer, but as a human being, to rescue those being killed.
So
don't let it happen.
It's a good transition back into our topic. Why don't we just finish up this timeline real quick? So the Uvalde police are entering the school, and this is the part I want to go. So the guy who's being charged, the chief of school district's police department, arrives at the scene and claims that he does not have radios because he wants both hands available should he encounter the shooter, in the parking lot, and believes that the radios would have slowed him down, his attorney said.
All right. Well, extra witness contact me. That's garbage. It's complete garbage. I actually did a full interview with Fred Varian, who has done in charge of radios, two-way radio comms for several of the Super Bowls. He retired just a couple of years ago. It's garbage. It's absolute garbage. It's a garbage statement. Absolutely. Right. Why? Of course you want radio comms. And this is another point. Like, where is a bill coming out saying, we're funding schools to have updated two-way radio communications, right? Or two-way radio communications training, repeaters, so schools can communicate across schools, or if students are evacuated, there can be communication as the evacuation is going, as students are a mile away or whatever. But this whole interoperability stuff, that was through the National Incident Management System stuff that was supposed to be done 15 years ago. That's a garbage statement. That's a cowardly statement. That's complete trash. And I would say that on in court.
We talked about this pre-show as well. Are they just handing out boxes and they're not giving out any training at all? They're literally just handing them boxes and saying, like radios, just literally just handing out handsets and saying, "Here, go."
I don't think that's it. So I was in charge.
I think there's really limited training on it, but Safety Doc mentioned this in the in our private chat, that the National Incident Management System and the Incident Command System that he would have been trained on would have had it drilled in his head that he was in command the moment he stepped out of a vehicle on that scene. That there was no one senior to him.
Well, who could have been senior to him? There's like literally, unless a federal agent, I suppose.
No. It's a local crime at that point. Federal agents can be there to assist. They don't have jurisdiction.
Well, there you go. So there's literally there's not a possibility that there's any crime scene he could ever arrive on in his district that it wouldn't be his responsibility.
Great. That's correct. Yeah. So two-way radio communications, by the way.
So I guess to wrap up here.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say two-way radio communications. it's a big need for school safety across all schools, and it's never funded. You never see it brought up in grant funding. Usually it's excluded. Two-way radio communications is excluded from a number of grants where I've helped schools apply for grants. It's excluded. So, but all right.
Yeah. So that's really the biggest thing. So I guess that to wrap up here, what I would suggest is get the Safety Docs books, right? You can find them on Amazon. Is there any other place to find your books, or tell people how to find you in general?
Right. Do you do signed copies like most of our friends? Like, is there anywhere they can reach out to get a copy signed by the author, maybe for a slight premium?
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. So some people do that. And what they'll do is one of two things: is they'll either just order it and they will have it sent to me. They'll send it to me. They'll contact me and they'll send it to me, and then I will, sign it and send it back. Or else, if you purchase it through Amazon, you can have it directly sent to somebody, and they'll say, "Hey, like I purchased this book, it's going to be coming to you." And then I don't have like this big system set up for how to sign books. And then I'll usually just say, okay, like I'll take it to the post office. What does it cost to send it to wherever? And then I'll say, here's what it is. If just send, I'll set up something in PayPal, someone will send it to me. But there are people that do that. I send books all over the world. I send books to the United Arab Emirates and, Germany and stuff like that. So Canada. If you do want to sign book, if you go to safetyphd.com, you go to contact doc, you can find my email address, and we'll work something out, right, where I can get that to you. I'm excited too. The book is available in hard copy, which is usually it's meant for libraries and universities. It's expensive. It's through a publisher, right? So paperback is, I think, $35 or $33. It goes on sale. And then it's ebook, and audiobook is also going to be out April 1st of next year, 2023. It's already done, but contractually can't be released early. But in addition to those, in School of Errors is an awesome book. We get into 9/11. There's an area, and I worked with the New York City Department of Planning, and we analyzed the rescue of 500,000 people in 9 hours from Lower Manhattan. How did that happen? No lawsuits. 500,000 people were rescued. Nobody trained on how to do this. Half of these were civilian boats, right? Tugboats and sightseers and whatever. How did that happen? And there's a lot to be learned in how you prepare for disaster, and how you have to have kind of this alpha, this apex person, or this statement of coming out and do this, right? And then people fall in and they believe that you'll have their back. And it's interesting too, because on 9/11, that harbor rescue, when that happened, people still believed that New York was being attacked. It wasn't that the attacks were done. They believed it was still being attacked as these rescues. So that is an awesome book to really get this tremendous insight of how schools approach safety, and also how off base it is and how it can be fixed. And if you're a parent, here's the questions I need to ask. Here's what I need to look for in the handbook. Here's what I need to ask my kids about their safety drill. And if you're a teacher, it's like, oh my God, like I need to, get a better handle on this from administration. If you're an administrator, this is a mandated textbook in the courses that I teach, and the university approved it. This book is in hundreds of libraries across the world, and it is saying, here's the common sense thing. I had a superintendent last year who said, we did fire drills, Dave, in September, and we had socially distanced fire drills. So every, we would have students line up, and then we would say, go. And then we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, go. I'm like, that's crazy. Like, why would you do that? A socially distanced fire drill? Well, I actually, didn't say that in the moment, but I'm thinking it. And we had a break, and I said, hey, let's talk about this. I said, this doesn't make sense, right? Because you want to get kids out. And he's like, yeah, I know. Like, it was socially, with so much pressure with, social distancing, and how do we do this for safety? I'm like, there's no non-negotiable. That's a non-negotiable. You get kids out of the building. And that's where the book comes in and says, use your discretion, use best interest, do what you have to do. And again, that's not what the industry says. The industry wants you to follow all of these flowery, wordy protocols that make everybody feel good, and equity and safety. There's no equity and safety. Get out of the building or get behind a locked door. Equity is everybody staying alive, right? And I was the first person to do that. And the book has had positive reviews. I mean, you go in and see it, and I've had, positive, and I was willing to stand behind it and do the research for it. So, and that's what I would say to people out there right now. That this doesn't smell right, what's happening in Uvalde and with the school safety bills and things like that. Say it and expect more out of your legislative representatives and of your school board. And hey, what's happening for these safety drills? And again, you can read through my body of work, 180 blog posts. They're all very thoroughly done. The book is exceptional. School of Errors is awesome. And as a taxpayer, like, what are we spending money? You drive past a school and they have these bollards out in front. I have that picture in my book, and it's just absolutely insane. How people make decisions that don't make sense. But yeah, safetyphd.com, you'll find my body of work. Every blog post is out there. All the podcasts are out there. There's over 180, a lot of guests on there too. And I'm your good guy, right? I'm really the person who's on your side. I'm not paid by insurance companies. I'm not paid by vendors. Actually, sometimes when I get invited to conferences, I'll get notified the next day. Hey, we can't have you here. Well, why not? Well, because we're paying a vendor $20,000 to have whatever product, which you're saying, you don't need that product, right? You need to drill people on discretion and understanding. Like this fifth grader, if they see somebody come in with a baseball bat and they're threatening somebody, that they can activate a lockdown. Like, you don't need this system for that. So I'm glad to carry that mantle. I'm really proud to do that, and I'm not relenting, right, to the forces out there that try to steer your eyes to other directions. And this whole thing too, like if the FBI comes out and says, "Oh, like we're seeing this uptick in group chats and whatever," then intervene. And that is so absolutely mind-boggling, to me. Merrick Garland coming out in last fall, I'm teaching my superintendent class and saying, "Oh, we want school boards to be able to report to the FBI parents that they believe are dangerous." Right? That was a statement that came out from the Merrick Garland. And it was supposed to be the first week in November, the FBI would issue guidance to school districts on what to do. They never issued guidance. I still get contacted from superintendents today who have had my classes and said, "Dave, have you had an update? What are we supposed to do? Like, what do they expect? Do they expect us to put cameras up at board meetings? Are they expecting us to turn in a list of parents we think?" And I'm like, use your mind. It's not you against the parents, right? That's not the way it is. I mean, most of these board meetings are very civil. Most of these parents are very supportive of their schools and their students. It's not you against the parents. But it's kind of
it's going to be telling when they finally have a school board meeting after this. It's going to be fire.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I can't imagine it being restrained and civil. And I know that they'll try this thing, and I know you've talked on this before, but this current trend to exclude the public from school board meetings, that's not actually legal, is it?
No, it's not legal, not at all. What they do is, try to frame it as, well, under COVID, right? It was convenient to do that. Right.
Yeah.
It was under the pandemic. It was convenient. Because you could say that, but or to say that you have, I ran for local councilman. I wasn't voted in, but that was one of the things, was transparency in meetings.
I
but
heard
also,
I ran for local prosecutor.
You did much better than I did. You almost won. You were like leading at like 3 a.m, and then suddenly just absentee ballots, and it didn't happen. But
for those who don't know, Safety Doc made a fake meme that I was running for Wayne County prosecutor in Detroit, and it actually confused people, and there were people who legit thought I was running. But anyway, carry on. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, no.
Have you checked to see how many write-ins you got?
No.
It was
sorry, you asked me to pull this up earlier and I only just found it.
Okay, so that is a picture that I took. It's in School of Errors, and that is in front of an elementary school that is 2 blocks away from where I live. My daughter attended the school at the time that picture was taken. Those bollards you can see were just freshly drilled in to the ground. Now I want to point, if you can look on both sides, those are metal benches. Those are screwed into or bolted down into the concrete. What do you think is the space between that metal bench and the bollard on each side? Just kind of by, maybe by eyeballing that, what would you say?
6 feet.
36 to 48.
Yeah, it wasn't enough to get a wheelchair through on either side.
It's
and
required
through the middle,
to be 36 by law.
through the middle, you could, clearance was about 40 inches. But again, I was a director of special education. I was the director of therapy and safety services for the Wisconsin School for the Blind until 2019. A lot of the new wheelchairs are, getting closer, to 40 inches, the battery operated chairs. It would be very difficult to get people safely through those areas. So this did nothing to make that school safer. By the way, like if I were to do a pullback on that and to show you, this is a curved entrance and then it drops down about 8 feet toward the road. So like you'd have to somehow maneuver in, and this is all a huge 20-foot sidewalk in front of there that doesn't have bollards. In back of the building, they load the buses. That doesn't have bollards, and that's open to the public as far as like a road, that comes by that. So this is selective. Basically, they wrote a grant. In the grant, one of the requirements was, okay, you have to have bollards in front of all of your buildings, which they did. And I argued, and I addressed the superintendent, and I said, these are garbage. They're going to make things more dangerous in winter because
they solve a problem you don't have.
Well, a problem you don't have. It's customer perceived value. You're a parent, you come in front of this. Oh, we have bollards. Like it looks safe.
I say it all the time. When everyone recommends bollards or asks me about bollards, I'm like, do you have a lot of vehicle attacks? No, then it's just a marketing gimmick, right? Anyway,
it is.
I'm sorry.
And the thing is, like, this is a camera is kind of non-invasive. If a camera really doesn't do what you want it to do, big deal, right? You can just turn it off. It's up in the corner. You have to get by these. You have to saw these things off and grind them down and all this stuff if you were to take them out. They rusted at the bottom. In winter, it ices around these things. I go by those every night. It is just horrible. So yeah, but people see this customer perceived value. Then it's social proof that website was up and then it was taken down. Dolio for America. So. It got spam. It got a DNS attack.
It's not even a picture of me.
It's taken. That was Joe about 7 years ago. So it was an awards ceremony at the Pontiac Silverdome before they shut it down. That is Joe Dolio right there.
That's the best part about Doc, the ability to make up a story on the spot.
If you go back and do a video search, I think about 7 years ago, it was right before the Pontiac Silverdome came down. So that was the last event held there as a rally for Joe. 84,000 people. But yeah, so so these bollards, right? And it's the last time you wore a tie. It's a great photo of you. I mean, I wish I had the like authentic color. I mean, I kind of just black and white.
Listen, actually, I wear a tie fairly regularly.
Okay.
And I will point out that I look dang better than that guy in a suit.
Actually, I mean, I've got a picture of Joe in his Sunday best here. Hold on, no, Joe just posted a picture of himself in his Sunday best on his blog feed. Actually, yeah, you did.
Oh, yes,
yeah.
Yes, I did.
This is Joe in his full Sunday best.
I said actual photo of me. Yeah. Anyway,
and see, like,
anyway, carry on with the story.
So, anyway, so the bollard stuff. And actually, the media, our local newspaper, interviewed the superintendent and said, "Are you aware of Dr. Perrodin's comments or like his book?" And she was retiring anyway, so she said no. and I'm not here to cause trouble, but I mean, I was quickly pointing out. And I knew principals, right? So I talked to them and said, "How are your two-way radio communications?" And they said, they're not good. Like we can't communicate across buildings. We can't communicate. And the campus is pretty close together. We can't communicate from building to building throughout our buildings and stuff. I'm like, well, that's where the money should have went, right? Instead of these bollards, like your two-way radio communications would have been an instant increase. And it's not only for a school shooter, right? you have a kid on a playground and the kid is having an epileptic seizure, two-way radio, right? Immediately to the office.
Yeah.
Or if you're working and that student is being transported, two-way radios are just invaluable as safety. And yet we
And
don't
you know
hear
what?
about
They
them.
just go and buy them off the shelf, right? It's like, let me just grab them. And they don't realize that, hey, we're in buildings. I need UHF
You have to have
as
this
opposed to
right.
VHF.
You need to have this just professionally done. Like bringing in someone who professionally is a vendor with two-way radio communications, and then they analyze and they can tell you, here's where you need to have a repeater to strengthen your signals. And when I was an administrator with a school district, we were able to put a repeater on a cellular tower. Like they didn't charge us anything. We just said, can we do this? Because, right. Like, but anyway, the vendor was saying to us, if you could have access to that tower, you could likely communicate across your buildings. We approached and we said, this is whatever. And they're like, sure. So, but I talk about this and people, Vanessa and, if in anti-commie New York Outcast, I mean, Karen, this might be the first time you've heard about this, right? Why isn't this what is talked about? Why isn't there some logical, again, it's in the book. I have this very thorough descriptions of, the two-way radio communications and as a school and as I teach administrators, and I've taught maybe 1 out of 5 sitting administrators in the state of Wisconsin over the past 18 years. Here's what to do. And here's also the rhetoric, and here's the smoke and mirrors, right? The stuff that's going to get you. And here's the federal stuff that's going to be divisive and try to separate you from your relationship with your community and your teachers, like the Merrick Garland statement of if you anticipate or have a sense that family or parents are going to be causing trouble to a school, whatever vague terms there are, like here's how to submit information to us and we'll create a record on them or whatever. I mean, it was really crazy. Like all that stuff is out there if you go and Google it. And my soups are like, I don't want to be the person who drives a wedge between the school district and the parents, right? And I'm like, you shouldn't be. I mean, you're a pawn. You're being pawned right now, by these documents, right? Which ultimately, I think the teachers union at a national level had some role in that too. But yeah, so I think it is be critical, be skeptical, and be realistic. And this isn't all lost. There are ways to fix this. Getting my book is one way to fix it. The PBS presentations, which are free, are awesome. So,
the other thing too is finding out what the intent is. So you mentioned cameras. In a lot of places, whenever a security event happens, I say, well, that's it. We're getting cameras. But cameras, I always say, okay, you want to install a camera system. Who is going to be detailed to watch the cameras 24 hours a day? Well, no one is. Okay, then cameras are simply to record your death for posterity. They're not really
right.
They're not going to do you any good unless someone physically monitors them to say, hey, there's a guy coming in through a door that shouldn't be. So you have to have a reason for everything you put in place, and it has to be manned or observed for it to work.
Oh, you're right on. So that's the part with cameras. And I wrote about it in School of Errors. Cameras are great forensic tools. They're not great in the moment tools. And a lot of violent acts only take, 1, 2, 3 minutes and they're done, right? So if you think you're going to also, because here's what vendors will do. They'll say, well, we'll put this multi-$1,000 8K camera system in your building, and police will be able to log into it and they'll be able to see what's happening and then, respond accordingly. That doesn't happen. That's not realistic, right? And police are responding. I did this. I was in the cruisers, right? You're not going to have a video in one hand of trying to see what's happening in the school and a gun in another. I mean, these things, it's just not realistic. So, but it's a marketing tool. But Joe, you're right on. Like to believe, I mean, they might have a deterrent value to some extent, but in extreme act of violence, they're not preventative. It's merely there as a forensic tool.
Well,
and again,
if we're just talking about them as a deterrent, you can put up fake cameras, but
you can put up, right.
Well, but hold on though. You have to be careful with that, because then there is what's called the expectation of safety. If you put up fake cameras, people have the expectation that someone is watching the cameras and will protect them. You have to be very careful on fake cameras.
Well, isn't that what we already have? Isn't that what we're essentially already talking about? Is it? There's
Yeah, but
like
those are at
people
least
putting up
recorded, and you
cameras.
can go back and retain the video.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, and they got into, or schools got into trouble with that, with school buses, right? They'd always,
Yeah.
for a while, they'd have the fake camera in the buses. But then, of course, there wasn't any evidence. Well, I mean, and we just got onto this, guys, right? But how about buses? So we talk about schools. What about buses? What about schools have 4K sites in the community, which might be at a daycare? Well, that isn't, that doesn't have the same safety drills that the school runs, and they might not even be notified if there's an intruder event happening at a school or a non-custodial parent. But yet, like, the non-custodial parents at the middle school, but the sibling is at the 4K site. That's not done. How about bus pickups where 10 kids are waiting to get picked up? So you can go down this whole line of okay, we're just going to fortify, or we're going to remove access to magazines or whatever from the system or things. But you cannot harden society, right? This has to. And why are we kind of at this place anyway? Like, we're at this place because we've had administrations which have undersold us for years. I'm doing an article right now on students abeyance agreements. It's going to be a feature in the biggest school safety, or the biggest school journal in the country. It'll be a feature in December. I'm writing it, and in 2014, the Obama administration's dear colleague letter to schools saying, hey, like, decrease your discipline numbers, right? It doesn't look good for a country to have these high discipline, suspension, expulsion numbers. So do what you can to decrease them. It's in the dear colleague letter. So schools started to change discipline, right? They didn't discipline as extensively. They weren't investigating acts of whether it be violence or threats or whatever as extensively as they were in the past, because then these things would show up. Schools get dinged for this, by the way. I was in a school district that got dinged for disproportionality, too many students in a certain class having suspensions. We were forced to allocate money to that area. We had to send staff to trainings. We had a corrective action plan. It showed up on our school report card. It was a deterrent for other parents enrolling their kids to our district. So schools, the system is forcing schools to go underground with these abeyance agreements. Abeyance agreement is basically a plea. Student says, I'm going to do something violent. Now people will say, Dave, that's not what's happening. I know it's exactly what's happening. Again, I'm writing the article about it. I'm working with attorneys. I'm working with attorneys at Northwestern Pritzker Law School on this as a legal note. Schools are doing these abeyance agreements where they'll say, okay, you made this threat. Now, okay, we have this plan together. It's one page. Follow the rules for the next 90 days. And if you do that, we will wipe it off the record. Nowhere will it show up. It's abeyance, plea in abeyance. It'll be gone. That's from the criminal justice system. Now it's in schools. It started to show up after the 2014 letter from the Obama administration, the dear colleague letter saying we need to decrease the instance of discipline in school, right? So a lot of this comes back to policy. So I think it's interesting on the shooter, right? On the shooter, was the shooter ever part of an abeyance agreement? What kind of discipline did this shooter have? And actually, there's a statement. I think I have it in my rough copy over here, which is just absolutely terrifying. But I don't know if I have it. I don't know this one. Oh yeah, I do. I have it. So the United States Government Accountability Office, the USGOA. So another agency coming in to research things for school safety. The U.S. Government Accountability Office in 2020 found no empirical research from 2009 to 2019, 10 years, that directly examined the link between school discipline and school shootings. So another part of this is, again, we go to all this legislation, reduce magazines and all this stuff like this. There is no study. There is no study out there. There's no funding for a study. There's no research between discipline and acts of violence against schools. There's nothing. The GOA has come out flatly and said, we found nothing. So again, we have these abeyance agreements which hide discipline. And then so the thought is, if you had discipline, you would be able to, in these things, if a student had multiple events happen, you'd say, that student needs help, right? We need to get some mental health or some inpatient
As I
treatment or stuff like
understand
this.
it, He was arrested for a prior threat to the middle school
Yeah.
2 years ago.
So those types of things aren't showing up as clearly as they were 10 years ago, if they're showing
Right.
up at all. And that's where I'm writing this article. And there's no other article like this, right? Like working with Pritzker with Northwestern and a couple of their students in kind of their law faculty, they're coming out with a legal note on this. And the legal note then is something that would, so this is nowhere in education law, by the way, that schools can do this, but we know that schools do this all the time. The legal note then can be referenced by parents, litigating against schools of saying, hey, you shouldn't be doing these abeyance agreements and other things. So, and my article is just an eye opener of saying these things exist, and they exist all over the place. But what you're also seeing for students who commit violent acts against school, they've usually done things in the past, and now more and more of those things are wiped off the books. They're nowhere in the records for the student, and that is a big problem, right? It's a huge problem. And why is it wiped off the records? Because, right, we have these dear colleague letters. 2004, No Child Left Behind came out and said, if your child is in a persistently dangerous school, you have the right to request that your child go to another school. Well, persistently dangerous, like what did that mean? Like you'd have to look at certain data and suspensions, expulsions. So schools were like, we don't want suspensions, expulsions. We don't want to be identified as persistently dangerous. Like what school would? So schools started to go underground with their reporting. North Carolina, I wrote about it in School of Errors. North Carolina changed their reporting for school discipline. I think there were like 113 categories you could put things in. One was like a fray. A fray is like what, a fight between two people. I don't know why you call it fray. Another one is like gambling and all these things. Like if you could, but the thought was, right, if you could broaden it out across enough categories, it wouldn't peak. It wouldn't bring your attention to any one category. And so in School of Errors, you get to see where the dismantling of school safety, and this is like in the book Max Eden wrote of why Meadow died for Parkland. It's very similar. And I know Max, and Max was actually a guest on my podcast, but the policies, you have to be aware of what's happening with policies and the fact that, schools will tell you, teachers and administrators will tell you, there's a lot of, students in need in violent acts that are happening, which just do not ever make it to a state reporting system. There's no federal registry for school violence. States go state by state. There's no interstate reliability. And this whole abeyance agreement, and I will get a lot of flack from this because lawyers will say, oh, that's discretion of the school. They need to do that so they can administer in case a kid chews a Pop-Tart in the shape of a gun and he's 7 years old, that they can don't have to go by they don't have to, they can exercise discretion and say, oh, we're going to suspend this consequence, right? This discipline. But I'm saying, no, you're using it as a way to make it look like nothing is wrong. And the fact that if there is something wrong, then we have to do something about it. Maybe there needs to be consequences or programs or whatever it is, but it's just to make it disappear through these abeyance agreements. Again, if you go to any school, any state, suspensions are down, expulsions are down. You ask any teacher, administrator, the issues that would have resulted in those have increased over the last 5 years, even though the statistics are down. So everyone will say, oh, schools are, safer, right? There's less and less. No, they just use abeyance agreements and they cover it up, and then abeyance agreements disappear, as they do in law, as they do in the criminal justice system. They're not part of the education system, and they disappear, and no one brings up anything about it. You give up due process. You basically plea. Guys, by the way, I've been a part of this. It takes 5 minutes. You bring it. You have a lawyer there. A parent is there. Child was doing something, and or maybe a student who had drugs on campus or was whatever, and you say, okay, here's what you did. For the next 90 days, you have to follow the code of conduct for the school. Sign on the bottom, and if you do that for the next 90 days, then this vanishes, right? It's removed from your record, and it appears nowhere. And the student has no ability to plead their side of the case or anything. The parent feels they're getting a deal. The parent is like, oh my God, the school's giving me a break. I don't have to go through expulsion. My kid's getting a break. Or the parent feels, I'm so powerful, the school is cutting me this deal. And I just
Yeah.
forced them into this. So they win either way, and the school doesn't care because they get the abeyance agreement. It never shows up in the books. The principals look great. The Board of Education looks great. For open enrollment, you look great. So these things are much deeper for school safety than, everything that's kind of surfacing with Uvalde. Like, I look at this student, did this student have some kind of abeyance agreement that carried out the act of violence? Did the Nicholas Cruz have this? Did others? We'll never know, because you can request it through open freedom of information, and the district will say, I can't give you something that technically doesn't exist. I'm sorry.
Right. And that's one of the biggest problems that we have. Well, as we're rolling up on 2 hours, I think we're going to call a cap to this, but I highly recommend you check out Doc's channel, Doc's blog posts. You should watch every episode of his that I am on, because we have a lot of fun. And I'm going to tell you, I saw a spicy Doc today, and I liked it. I liked it. Doc was fired up. If you guys like that kind of spicy talk, you ought to check out my last blog post over at tactical-wisdom.com, where I say it's time, Christians. It's time to do something about what's going on in this country. God expects you to. If you don't believe that, read the book of Jeremiah. Check out my books. I had to have some unexpected car repairs this week that were a little bit costly, so Daddy needs y'all to go buy some books. When we get off of here, go buy a couple of books. A credit card bill is going to come one day, and I need to get on there.
How about them patches? Do you have patches available, Joe Dolio?
I have a few patches still available, but you know who does have patches available? The Council on Future Conflict.
Oh, we do. But I was gonna say this is for car repairs. Get those patches while you still got them, folks. I mean, we're gonna be doing some stickers soon, but for now, get those patches. I don't think there's many left.
And what's going to happen for those of you who are Tactical Wisdom fans? My Tactical Wisdom stickers that everyone has been asking for over a year, Watcher is going to put on the Future Conflict page to be sold when we get it done. We're not ready yet, but it's going to pop up there. So that's it. So Doc, any last words from you?
Yeah. First of all, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We've been meaning to do this forever, but anyway.
Yeah. And I appreciate it immensely, as listeners can tell. I mean, I'm very passionate about this, and my positions are very clear on this. And also, your Tactical Wisdom series, I highly recommend, and I own. And one of the reviews, I'm holding up the book, but you're very concise and crisp in your writing. You are actually, this is authentic. To do a word cloud search of what appears most in the velocity of information, it is Joe Dolio. I think you have 29. I devoted 29 pages throughout the book to different aspects of gathering indicators or building a member check network. But it is because you're grounded. You're there. It's authentic, and it's something that when people read it, it's not like, oh my goodness, now I've got to do all these things to build this member check network. No, it's like, you have this, and in 5-10 minutes, you can start to put this together and have a very effective network. So you contributed significantly. And as I interviewed 10 people, as I cited 471 sources, as I was doing the outline, I immediately had your name, because you're so good at this. And I think people, as they listen to this, that go and you'll appreciate, and you'll be, I think, validated that there is this very common sense, methodical thinking that aligns to people. And I said I couldn't do it, because I cited you and I brought you in, that resource extended to my audience, which was awesome. So as a friend, I appreciate you and your professional work. I read your blog post yesterday too. I was feeling the same thing. It is action time for people. So thank you for all of your work. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to share about school safety today. So,
you will be back. We know this. You will be back, and we'll get a few others on here. And I apologize to my viewers about not getting any videos out for a while. We have a whole bunch of material recorded. We just
do.
we just got to get it out. And Watcher, can you drop that link to the Future Conflict?
Yeah, I've dropped it. I've dropped it a couple times. I don't know if YouTube's been killing it or something, but it shouldn't because I'm a moderator. It's just Future Dash Conflict is what it is.
All right, yeah, Future Dash Conflict. There we go.
Yep. But yeah, everybody. So the backlog's been me, as you guys know. I handle all the merch and all the production and all of the other stuff for this channel and Future Conflict and my own, and then one more. So yeah, no, I've got almost all the patches out. By the way, I think there's under 10. I opened it up to those dirty Europeans today, and I suspect,
like Declar.
They're gonna snatch up those patches at any moment. I can feel it.
Listen, and for Declar, if you're still on there, we might work out some sort of an exchange of Scotch whiskey for something. I mean, I'm just saying.
Yeah, trading kind.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for watching. We're really glad that you were here, and stay tuned for more.
Thank you.